Welcome to the Haunting of Quantitative Data. I'm Kate, that's Beatrix, and this is a campfire story of how I learned to embrace quantitative data after years of qualitative research practice. This session is also part of the QRCA series here at Quarks this week. If you made it to any of the other sessions, I hope you're experiencing the incredible team-like culture that this organization has. There are also plenty of learning opportunities beyond traditional qualitative focus groups. There are other hybrid researchers just like myself and several other disciplines. It's not just a moderator's playground. When I first started working in qualitative research 10 years ago, I was basically taught that there were two separate and distinct research disciplines, qualitative and quantitative. And honestly, sometimes it felt and still feels like these two research styles are the only two. And again, they definitely serve specific functions, but it's always bothered me when I would hear other qualitative researchers say things like, I don't do charts, or it's not about the volume, it's how people feel, or leave the numbers to the other guy. Why can't the two just get along? Some of it, I think, is how daunting quantitative data is and the fear in misusing the information. Some feel that quantitative research constructs are the boogeyman to insight generation, which sounds crazy. Quantitative data is not the bad guy. Our own training limitations are what get us stuck in using both fields to our advantage. And in reality, qualitative researchers actually benefit more from quantitative data metrics than they think they do. When we're pouring through thousands of words of transcripts to confirm ideas we heard in live sessions, or when we're using specific research tools like eye tracking or biometrics, we've slowly been blending these research tools to amplify our insights. And here's the thing, the pumpkin in the room, if I can use a pun. Quantitative is absolutely a substantial metric, especially in terms of validity. But I passionately feel that quantitative data can't and shouldn't exist in an entirely separate vacuum. To this day, I see too many job postings in our insight field that are focused on analysts and statistical modeling only, or some fancy software certifications, which I agree, those skills are absolutely needed, but interpretation from qualitative training enhances those research results. We should be leveraging how these two work, including how critical insight generation through qualitative training is an absolute must in our industry. There are so many ways of data collection and disciplines these days. It's not just qual and quant. We've got usability, experience, communications, ad performance, NPS, branding, advertising, social intelligence. I mean, the list goes on. And all of these creative research styles benefit from qualitative interpretation and understanding that root why behind consumer sentiment. I won't argue that there isn't a time and place for quant-only projects or qual-only projects. However, I see a much more efficient research design when we blend these techniques. Hybrid design is more flexible to business and project objectives. When blended, it's also naturally assisting data interpretation in an efficient manner. It doesn't have to be multi-phase projects where you wait to learn more. In addition to being flexible, it's also easy to adapt to many qualitative research designs, even more so in the online space. My goal today is to inspire new thinking approaches for research design, specifically how to use both qual and quant and hybrid models to get insight and innovation faster. So if you're an exclusive qualitative researcher, hopefully these two case studies I present will help you to, quote, find the right potion when developing the best ratio of qual and quant metrics for your research objectives. All Halloween jokes aside, I really want the industry to see the magic behind the blending as much as I have. The first of these examples is a research design that was focused entirely on messaging communication for a client who's in the consumer technology space. And true story, this was an experiment for both us and them. The previous research partner they were using fell flat when making actionable recommendations through traditional qualitative focus groups. The client needed to learn a messaging hierarchy and the specific copy changes that would be needed to boost when resonating with consumers. To do this, we tapped into our unique implicit survey instrument that calculates the consumer's answer speed into slow and fast reaction times. In essence, the quicker response to that answer will allude to a more instinctive perception or a system 1 response, whereas slower answers are more reflective of system 2 thinking, which typically considers more energy and attention. It potentially shows us areas of distraction. Now, it's important to note that we typically use this technique in much larger sample sizes, not our 30-something recruits for a few focus groups. We challenged that notion with this design, and it paid off big time. For this study, we used that tool as a homework assignment, but not in a traditional generic survey. Here, we ask a binary response every time. And while I have yes and no as our example here and what we used in the study, it could be any other 2 pairings. The same overarching question was also true for all of the main messages, which were blinded, both a little bit for the consumers. We didn't tell them who the brand was or who the product was. And for this presentation, we changed things. The purpose of that blinding aspect on the consumer side was to make sure that we were getting to those idea considerations and not getting hung up on who was providing the product or service. You'll notice we didn't ask the liking question, and the reason why we didn't is a whole other soapbox and presentation for another day, but we truly feel like we can gain better clarifying information than generic likes or dislikes, especially when you can ask a question rooted more in behavior and action. Liking doesn't move the needle. To quickly show you how we use these results, I first need to explain very briefly what these results even mean. So from a bird's eye view, you can see some key trends that emerge from among the consumers in the aggregate that we leveraged more in the room, right? So this is the holistic, how everybody answered across all participants, all recruits, all sessions. Headline 1 clearly requires less thought in determining if it's really relevant to their category experience. We can see this with a proportion of fast yes responses it received. And really, if you look at the proportion of both fast and slow yeses combined, for most of these headlines, all but headline 4, pretty much received clear affirmation on relevance. There's something that's connecting with the consumers we knew off the bat. Headlines 2 and 5 do end up garnering a modest number of negative, more knee-jerk reactions, but the contents of the messaging clearly still resonate among many of our participants. This wasn't something that was alarming yet, but was still really great fodder to know ahead of time. Now, what we've learned in our time leveraging implicit techniques is those slow responses don't necessarily reflect a disconnect with the consumer. They're often an incredibly strong indicator that your messaging includes some form of trigger for disruptive thought, which can sometimes pose as a greater value than implicit connections. It boils down to what you're trying to achieve through the messaging. We see here that many of these headlines are actually quite good at inspiring disruptive thinking and still result in participants identifying something relevant within the messaging. While these broader trends were available, we also needed to look at a little bit more, less of a bird's eye view to really improve the quality of our in-room discussions. And so for that, we went deeper, analyzing each participant's set of responses across the headlines. We used this type of summary over the course of the actual focus groups to probe on initial reactions to the messaging, teasing out why they reacted to a headline the way that they did. As I mentioned earlier, getting these initial exposures and reactions to messaging pre-session, it made a world of difference in allowing us to focus on the why and devote more time to uncovering useful feedback on what worked and what didn't. Ways we probed included, what about this statement slowed you down, which was pivotal for those copywriting needs that we needed to provide insight on. Now, keep in mind, all of that analysis that I just showed you was from just one appealing metric. Imagine if we had dove deeper into other behavior units, and that's what we did in the room. One of the in-room exercises was having the group categorize further into different topics after we discussed them individually. This was our comparison test. The first value was for which resonated the most. Then we had which one best communicated the main benefit, which was most appealing, and finally, which was the most motivating to actually purchase within the category. Ultimately, this is where the needle needs to move. As our analysis was building, this is really where I started to see the magic happen with these techniques blending. If we had just used an implicit quantitative survey design for this task, we would have leaned strongly with headline number 1. It ranks the strongest in terms of those yes responses. However, we asked why headline 5 slowed consumers down. Remember, it was a slower yes in the homework. And we learned there was a lot more power across the board on different elements that was ultimately leading to that moving of the needle that we needed. So what we learned was ultimately headline 5 was the clear winner when we developed the hierarchy for our client, but it took qualitative interpretations to get us there. Yes, there were definitely others that were stronger when it came to the implicit testing, but that was just one data point. Other statements, other headlines were more functionally appealing even in the room. However, the combination of analysis between the quant and qual led us to that disruptive potential and the balance between impactful language and substance that this product or service needed. We also learned that using implicit techniques helped us uncover messaging elements that were best for queuing up desire and also about influencing behaviors surrounding their purchase patterns. And what made this magical for me was how layering these techniques together gave us guidance on features, newness, and innovation. Some of the headlines we discovered that the team felt were the most compelling. To the consumer, they really didn't mean anything. The slowness was becoming a detractor and not a moment of innovation. So this additional layer of insight will be carried through to the team for future campaigns with specific words and phrases and comparisons to use and not use moving forward. Okay, so I mentioned there was some importance on balancing these two disciplines. So for this case study, qualitative influenced the quantitative by using binary responses based on interests and motivations, not likability. It also served functionally as a homework assignment for each person and per segment before their sessions. And quantitative influenced our group discussions by analyzing those measured response times to probe with what slowed you down. The results aided in the messaging evaluations to create that behavior hierarchy that we needed. The next case study will go a little quicker. It was for a healthcare client and was a bit broader in terms of consumer or patient need states and market understanding on a high level. It wasn't for a campaign like the first example. Our broader research design was really two-pronged. We did actually start with a quantitative phase for this initiative, primarily to ensure there was a high level of confidence in our market level findings. That first phase covered previous experiences with different providers, brand appraisals across key competitors, perceptions of virtual care versus in-person care, and finally a read on messaging used in marketing communications tested against competitor messaging. We also incorporated a first go at some of the draft messaging they were considering to use for a relaunch, but that wasn't the main objective. Basically, it was a catch-all quant survey to better plan the qual portion. We needed to learn what we didn't know so we could find out what we needed to learn more about. So at this point in the project, we were pretty confident that we wanted to speak with, and the goals of this phase were more pointed. We intended on focusing on the polar opposites of the behavior spectrum, engaging with those consumers who demonstrated a clear preferentiality for specific brands and those who appeared to have engaged with any and every brand available. What we wanted to understand was whether or not attitudes towards continuity of care could be traced back to experiences with and the importance of actual services and amenities. In the 5-day session, we used survey tasks within the discussion topics to better organize both our data analysis as well as help consumers categorize their opinions. If we had left this to all open-ended live discussion, the themes would have literally been all over the place because there were so many things we needed to talk about. We were also using a platform that enabled us to use great tools within the activities than standard dialogue-only type questions. This alone has some quantitative functionality if you think about it. So once you learn that exports and celled data is your friend as a qualitative researcher, your question asking becomes tighter, which really helps organize the flood of data that's about to come. One of the more pivotal exercises that we used that week was a card-based sort and rank exercise. We were able to quantify relevance and importance among more than 30 services and amenities commonly offered throughout major health systems. The results were reconciled against those quantitative findings as a gut check validation on our own behavioral segments. The benefit of the exploration in this phase was to dig deeper on why some of these services were more meaningful than others to participate and how their feelings related back to their broader intentions with healthcare providers. Now, card sorts are not new to qualitative research, but with a few dozen participants, 2 segments, and 30 plus cards, programming was like a heck of a lot easier to digest for everyone rather than asking an open-ended question or trying to, recombine your notes after 20 IDIs. The other piece of the puzzle was actually determining those attitudes towards some of the major brands, along with the experiences that arose from and where they net out when it comes to consideration. We asked participants to bucket these brands into what they would consider preferred providers, those they were indifferent towards, and ultimately the ones they would actively avoid. From there, we were able to formulate guidance on how to develop messaging uniquely tailored to increasing brand preference and encouraging a greater continuity of care. That was part of our objective. Again, this is essentially programming a card sorting exercise, but it allowed us to quickly see the trends and immediately roll into a discussion on themes. The quant components speed up the discussion. All right, so you may be a little dizzy, so let me clarify a few pieces. The 5-day board for this particular project would generally alternate between a quant component and then a qual component. So it definitely requires some agility and flexibility. You have to be willing to adapt throughout the week. This entire week was also a blend of quant question styles. So we didn't just use card sorts, we also used some tournament style quantitative surveys. We used our implicit research design again. We used some just basic close-ended and multi-select questions as well. It was really a big mix. If we had tried to do, like I said, all of those things in just a group discussion format or open-end type dialogue, it would have been immeasurable as a qualitative researcher to get to those findings as quickly as we could and to help move the discussion further. So while this roller coaster may look a little crazy or unorganized for some, for hybrid researchers, this relationship is actually incredibly smooth with a very deliberate research design. It does require patience though, because as much as we want to pre-program material, as much as we want that activity guide to be a script, even though as qualitative researchers, we know discussion guides aren't scripts, we have to be able to build in some wiggle room for modifications as we discuss and learn. Otherwise, you're not capitalizing on the blending as best as you could have been. So this time, the qual components that influenced our quant design included using a modern twist on traditional in-room bucket sorting exercises. And throughout the week, we depended on the qualitative learnings to loop back into whatever the next quant component was going to be. Then on the quantitative influences for our qualitative, we were maximizing our discussion topics within the aggregate results. Those also help consumers organize their own thoughts because they knew they'd have the chance to discuss in more detail. Oftentimes in quantitative surveys, it's just that single engagement and you don't go back to learn more. We also capitalized on the survey and programming that comes with online boards. We use several mini-like surveys to capture and quantify simple responses and ideas and left the discussions for those heavier topics. This gave us and the participants much more stamina for the week-long engagement and just a lot more efficiency in using the best tools for whatever question we were trying to answer. Now, implicit testing, which we used in both of those case studies, is just one of the ways you can integrate into your hybrid designs. There's really limitless possibilities when you think about just how broad quantitative data is. Social intelligence, for one, is a huge value add. It allows you to take a step back and assess all that you already know to determine what you still need to learn and expand your knowledge. Back in the spring, I co-hosted a flash webinar series for QRCA with my industry colleague Frank on this very topic. Passive metering can also be used as a unique tool to identify what consumers' digital journeys really look like and how it compares to the action they think they're doing. Most of us have experienced the very real dilemma of deciphering what consumers are doing versus what they say they are. And even more complex research tools like MaxDiff aren't off limits. We can get at these using streamlined tournament designs before or after sessions to help organize the data. Or, since a majority of our qualitative work is still online these days, you can consider making a digital packet. They can be a real time saver on the back end. Again, once you start thinking about Excel data and celled data and helping your qualitative analysis, you really see the power in asking tighter questions. So this digital packet truly mirrors the concept of an in-person respondent packet, but it's just flipped into an in-the-moment survey instead of trying to work through all of those components into the live discussion. You would share the link with the respondents ahead of time, and then they would just bounce between the survey and your live interview in real time. There are some platforms as well that you can actually see the aggregate results if you're doing a focus group versus a one-on-one. And again, it's taking that exact same mindset of learning more, letting a respondent categorize their information, develop their own frame of reference before sharing with everybody else. But it's a way for you to capture that information. And not to mention when you go digital for a respondent packet, when you're doing online qual, you don't have to worry about the respondents having to send the packet back in, scanning it themselves, deciphering their handwriting. I can't tell you the amount of times I had to scratch my head and try to figure out what people meant year or months or weeks later when I was going back to review the results. So that's most of what I have for you today. I would love to hear though from all of you if there's other tricks or treats. I really like this Halloween pun going on how you have integrated quantitative and qualitative together in your own hybrid research designs. Feel free to drop a couple of comments in our session chat. I'm also available right now during the moderator chat of this presentation, so you can talk to me directly and ask some more questions. And if you prefer to connect with me directly, I am always down for a virtual coffee break. I'm a client partner at Insights Now, where I get to touch research design every single day with our clients and teammates. The beauty of being a hybrid researcher is truly limitless, and there's always so much to learn. And finally, I can't let you go without mentioning QRCA again. So if you want to learn more, please check us out at qrca.org. I have been an active volunteer and have learned so much about the qualitative research process from this group. And there's such a huge amount of resources available to furthering qualitative research training. It really is a gem in the industry. In the past few years, we have widened our membership base substantially to include various sectors of the research industry, including hybrids like myself, user experience professionals, and even client-side researchers. There's really an endless supply of suppliers and sponsors. I tell students when I guest lecture just how much I learn in the team environment when it comes to marketing research, both through QRCA and through live client work. And if they want to go into this field, you need to embrace those team aspects a little more than they might be when they're in the college setting. I hope everyone enjoyed and learned something from the session today. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you also have a safe and happy Halloween, despite any differences that there might be. And I can't go without also giving a quick shout out to one of my really great research providers, which is Reduct. Reduct offers a video service for closed captioning your videos, whether that's a highlight reel, whether that's an interview, or if it's a presentation like I'm using them for now. They have really helped me quite a bit in literally subtitle and closed captioning, but they also offer ways to highlight and separate your video themes. So feel free to check them out. They are also tightly ingrained with QRCA. Have a great rest of your day.